Let's take a look at leading or line spacing. Basically, the distance from the baseline of one line of type to another is referred to as leading or line spacing. The word leading refers to the strips of lead that were used to separate lines of metal type. The default line spacing in most layout and imaging software is slightly greater than the cap height of the letters. Expanding the distance creates a text block with a lighter, more open color. As line spacing increases further, the lines of type become independent linear elements rather than parts of an overall texture. And you can see I have some examples here of various fonts set with different line spacing. So here is Saban. It's a 10-point font set with a 12-point line spacing. Here's the exact same font, same size, but just set at a slightly higher line spacing, and you can see how we get more air in here. And it also makes the text, in some cases, if the line spacing isn't too much, it makes it a little bit easier to read. Over here I have Arial. This is also 10-point Arial set with a 12-point line spacing. And then here we have Arial again with a 14-point line spacing. And you can see the difference, even though these are both set at 10 points, the difference in the sans serif over here on the right and the serif font over here on the left, and how the line spacing affects each one. If we look here at these two examples, which block of these has larger line spacing? So you can see this is written in Saban and this is written in Arial. So if we look, they actually are set at the exact same size and the exact same line spacing. But if you look closely, you can see that the X height of Arial is more than Saban. So the Saban font appears to have more line spacing, but in fact both of the typefaces are set at the exact same type size and the same line spacing. So it means that the typeface with a small X height can use less line spacing because of the additional white space that's basically built into the font. Larger X heights, however, require greater line spacing to make the perceived white space adequately readable. So if we look back here, you can see how this actually looks like it has bigger line spacing, and that's just because the X height of this font is less than the X height of this font. It's kind of interesting. This right here is an example of set solid, and as you can see from these examples, the leading is the space between the lines, of course. You have control over how much space appears. Line spacing that is too tight can decrease readability because it makes it difficult for the reader to separate the individual words and phrases, and it makes it more difficult for the reader's eye to find the beginning of the next line. As a general rule, you need to increase line spacing when the length of the line is longer than average. So the longer the line, the greater the line spacing needs to be. If the typeface has a large X height, as do most sans serif fonts, and if you are reversing the type out of the background or solid color. You can decrease line spacing on an average length if your typeface has a very small X height. So small X heights create more space between the lines naturally, but be careful if you're using distinctive typefaces with small X heights. These generally work better in a more open, airy type of look. Traditionally, an average leading is 20% of the point size of type. So a 10-point type traditionally uses a 12-point leading. You can say 10 on 12 when you describe this. The term set solid, which is being shown right here, means that the type size and the line spacing are the same value. So here we have 14 on 14, which is going to give very little space between the lines, and it's going to make them more difficult to read. So you can see in our Arial example, the letters are basically hitting each other, and that doesn't work very well. And so Saban, it's a little bit better, but it still seems a little tight, especially when you get like in this section right here where you have this G dropping down. It starts to kind of almost run into the next line. But do know the terminology used to describe the text size and the line spacing. This would be 14 on 14, or you could just say set solid for this one. Although 20% of the point size of type is an average, there are many situations where you need to change that. The following are examples of line spacing that must be adjusted. If you have headlines and it runs 2 or more lines, you'll probably need to decrease the line spacing. The 20% average is okay for body copy, which is 9 to 12 point font size, but for sizes above that it becomes excessive, especially when you start to use point sizes above 45 points. If the headline has no descenders, then it becomes even more critical. So if you notice to the left here how much extra space there seems to be between the lines, especially since there's no descenders at all on my first line. In the example shown here, you can see how the readability has definitely improved. The two lines seem somewhat related and your eyes are able to flow through the information much easier. So here is the default line spacing of Arial that's set at 48 points of 58 point, but it really is too big in this situation. When here the line spacing has been adjusted to 45 point, which is referred to as a negative leading, the line spacing looks much better, and this is actually a better headline when we actually look at it. Considerations when you're using all caps in headlines. If you need to set a headline in all caps, removing some of the line spacing will improve the look and make the text much easier to read. So if you look at the examples here to the left, you'll notice how much extra space there seems to be between the lines, especially since there's no descenders. But if you look, all caps doesn't have any descenders at all. But if you look in the example below, you can see how the readability has definitely improved. The two lines seem related and your eye is able to flow through the information much easier again. So here, when you are using all caps, which you might not want to use all caps for this much text, but I just wanted to use this as an example. You have Saban that's set at 10 on 12, which is 20% line spacing, but here when we increase the line spacing a little bit to 15, you can see that this text looks more lighter and it feels lighter and airier. The increasing definitely improves this already difficult to read passage of text. And here's some considerations of using all caps in headlines. Again, here is our same two exotic zebras escape from the zoo. This is set in Eurostyle 40 point with a 48 point leading. And then here, where we have Eurostyle set at a 40 point with a 28 point leading, which is more like a negative 20%, you can see that removing some of the line spacing in the headlines is going to make them look easier to read. So this negative line spacing here has improved the readability and made this much easier to read. So in summary, when using type with large X heights, generally sans serifs, you need to increase line spacing. When you're using text with small X heights, decrease the line spacing. When using reverse type, you should increase both point size to increase the weight and also add additional line spacing to aid in readability. And when using long lines of type, add a bit more line spacing to aid the reader in finding the beginning of the next line of text. And finally, when using a typeface that is set wide, lots of letter spacing, add additional line spacing for balance.